So the question is this, because working out in the real world, we always have to pick up someone else's spreadsheet. So what can we do getting someone else's work to get started to really dig into the model and figure out what's going on? And let's say sometimes they're there, you can ask them questions, sometimes they're not. And the second part of this is what can we do as developers to make sure that the person who takes over our work, doesn't have to deal with what we have to deal with. It's easier for them to pick up. Everyone wants to program their way. Everyone wants to program for themselves. What can we do to really make it easier for others to do? So I'm tossing that to the panel. Rick, I think you had something in your head you were going to say.
Actually, this is near and dear to me because it's something I've struggled with for the last 3 or 4 weeks. Where I've been building a I inherited someone's dashboard, right? A dashboard that was built on a tool that was built on top of Excel, right? So all the logic and all the data connections are built into Excel. And with this, the person was just no longer there, and so I was brought in to handle defects. So this was going through user acceptance testing and all that sort of stuff, and they were finding defects, and I was brought in to kind of fix the defects. And the first problem is, oh my God. First off, I don't even know what this guy did. He's not around anymore. There's a little bit of color coding, but you got to figure out what the color codes mean, and logic is kind of all over the place. You don't have a clear idea of what's feeding the dashboard versus what's an input versus an output, where the calculations are, etc. So, for me, the first thing is getting to where the output is. And I always start at the very end if I'm trying to re-engineer someone's spreadsheet or trying to re-engineer anything for the most part. Start with the output, and then from the output, kind of work your way back. Now that can be difficult, right? Because let's back up just a little bit. Actually, it's much easier that way, in my opinion. You have the output, and then the output is usually where a lot of the calculations are. You get an idea of where the references are and all that sort of stuff. So for me, I usually work back that way. But the solution is clean data, or trying to put some sort of a structure in place. And tables is certainly very good for that, putting some sort of a structure in place. I know Oz likes that quite a bit. And for me, color coding helps quite a bit as well, of what's an output, what's an input. And even if you can put all of your outputs on one page, all of your inputs on one page, that's certainly, and have a certain place for your calculations, that's good as well. Also, notes. For me, any sort of notes you can put in the spreadsheet, even within the cell, say this calculation here is to do X, Y, or Z. For me, that helps out a lot. How about you, Mr. Dirty Data, Mr. Oz?
Well, first thing, don't panic. Don't panic. Just take a deep breath. Deal with it. I've done this a lot, and I think that's the first thing. Instead of opening it up and spending a whole lot of time chasing this and chasing that, because even when you can do the precedents, those arrows there, they still might not mean anything, because they might not be the end of it. It might go on to other workbooks or other worksheets. So the first thing has been don't panic, and I'm also learning to ask a lot of questions first before I go digging in and spending my time trying to see what I can figure out on my own. And where my Excel skill really picked up was when I inherited a complex spreadsheet, and I had to sit and try to figure out which starting parentheses went with the closing one, how to peel this down slowly, and allow myself that time. And fortunately, in that situation, there were a lot of spreadsheets, but they were consistent. That was helpful. So even though one might look like spaghetti, and the second one might look like spaghetti, by we got to the 7th and the 30th one, there was a pattern. Okay, so finding that pattern. How do I help people after me? Well, one thing I'll say is about VBA. This is a big one. people write VBA the way they write it. And every time somebody opens somebody else's VBA, they say, "Oh God, I can't believe they write code. Why did they write code like this?" Every time. And I think about looking at somebody's VBA is like looking at somebody else's poem and trying to fix it or rewrite somebody else's poem. It just doesn't work like that. So I warn when I do teach VBA, try to do worksheet first, because as Jordan was talking about, you know, future you and for others, it helps if things are in the worksheet. And keeping things grouped together, because it can be hard. If something is in hidden rows and columns, okay, that's one thing. But if somebody finds, okay, here are these hidden columns, and they unhide them, hopefully that's all. And that they don't have to go fishing around and find, oh, these other hidden columns over here too. And oh, and these rows. No, try to keep things consolidated. But the big thing is, I got a lot of skill by inheriting people's stuff and just slowing down and unraveling it slowly.
I think, you know, like in all our examples, we usually like start from scratch, but I think in real life, the way we learn is almost always reverse engineering, getting someone else's work and seeing what they did. I would say that just the soft skill, if you're doing this, you know, there are two things that you want to try not to do. The first is to automatically say, oh, we got to start this over from scratch, you know, because no client's going to want to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that. That's like what Oz was saying. I mean, it's along the lines of, who did this? You know, I would have never done it that way. So try to, if you feel yourself saying that, just time out. I mean, you may be right in the end, but time out. No one really wants to hear that just yet. So give it some time. The second thing is, don't blame that last person. Nobody wants to get blamed. So this is just a soft skill, you know, before you even get in, just working with a client. I would say, yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is something I struggle with. It's hard. So in terms of VBA, it's like what you were saying, Oz, like with the cable. Every time some guy comes over and like does service on our cable line, he always says, like, every single technician goes, "Who was out here? This ain't right. This isn't right. I don't know what this is." I swear to you, every single person. I've even taken my car in, and they're like, "Who looked at this last?" I'm like, "I only got one mechanic. It was you guys." You know, like who else would have looked at it? So don't do that, all right? Because you may find out that you were the last one to look at it. No, but seriously, there are things in terms of coding that you can do. Obviously commenting, but I do think that we comment too much sometimes. But here's two things, all right? Obviously option explicit, gotta throw that one out there. Second one is indentation. If you're writing code, indent, you know, that'll help people follow along because that creates sections and blocks. And as far as when I'm looking at other people's formulas, like those really long ones, what I like to do is I'll copy the whole thing and I'll paste it into Notepad. And Notepad uses, I think, it uses a fixed width font. So you can tab out and you can take a long function and you can break it into its parts and try to figure out what's going on. In terms of helping other people out, I'd say name the ranges. You know, give a cell a name so that it's semantic. You know, not if A1 equals this. Just say, you know, you could say if I don't know, if size, you name a cell size. So if size equals small, then do this, right? That's semantic. That is almost like a sentence. We know what's going on. So those are the things that I would say. Have you guys had any like horror stories maybe of inheriting something that was just so terrible that, well, I guess that's what, I don't know. I mean, well, yeah. I haven't run into anything that was so terrible I had to turn my back on it, but there were moments.
There was one, yeah, there was just VLOOKUPs galore. It was, I mean, but see, we're talking maybe hundreds of thousands. And there were times when the spreadsheet wouldn't even open, and the client kept saying, well, can't you just write a macro? Well, that was a situation where Excel really wasn't the tool. Because it was so much data and it was so dynamic, And this was pre Power Pivot, so maybe Power Pivot would have had a better way of handling it. But the way that it was, because it had all kinds of conditions in addition to the volume, and it had to know which column to go look at. It was a mess. And then the person who brought me in, she got to a place where she said, this is not good. And not so much the spreadsheet, but the demand that you are going to make it work. Just write a macro.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What gets me the most isn't necessarily the spreadsheet where there's a whole lot of stuff going on, because to me that's kind of a challenge, right? You get to kind of get in, you got to play, and all that. It's a pain in the butt. You got to figure it out, and hearing someone else's logic when there's a ton of logic in there, it's a challenge and it's a pain in the butt. But what ticks me off the most, and I found this quite a bit in financial modeling. When you think in financial modeling, working in a finance department, that most people are pretty adept at spreadsheets. Maybe not on the accounting side as much, but certainly in the financial modeling where you're doing forward-looking financial statements, etc. Most people kind of know their way around. And probably the most frustrating thing is whenever you walk into that sort of a situation where people are running pricing models for potentially $10 to $100 million deals. I mean, big stuff, right? And there's no creativity in the spreadsheet whatsoever. It's one sheet that almost looks like an invoice. I mean, there's nothing to it, and you're sitting there scratching your head saying, how are you running, potentially a Fortune 500 company? You're just something that's pretty big on nothing, on junk, and just a lack of creativity, and that I've seen at least in a lot of finance departments when you would expect to see more creativity. Has been probably more frustrating for me.
And what do you call creativity? Because I'm hearing something other than creativity, but like some making the logic more obvious.
Sure. Okay. So let's say, just as an example, that you're going to you're doing salary arbitrage, right? And we're just getting into a little bit of financial modeling here. And let's say you're doing salary arbitrage to where you're going to take over some work, and by salary arbitrage I mean you're going to do some of the work in India, you're going to do some of the work in Canada, you can do some of the work in different places, right? And the benefit that you're getting is the arbitrage is different salaries in different places, and the benefit that you would get from that, right? So there's a few things involved in that. First off, there's hedging, right? So if you have your revenue in one currency, right, and you have all of your expenses in another currency, right, then you run the risk of fluctuations in exchange rates, just as an example, right? So what some people will do is they'll do natural hedging, and they'll say, okay, well, I'm going to have as much of my expenses lined up into the country that I have, the revenue in, and so they'll do some of that sort of stuff. So global companies can get away with that. But so many people do things like that, very one-off. And here's what I'll mean. They'll put a big pricing model together to take over some work, and they'll have year after year of here's what we expect the income statement to look like year 1, year 2, year 3, net present value, internal rate of return, all of the calculations, everything kind of done, knowing darn well that whenever they walk into the executive's office, the executive's going to say, well, what if we move 15 more people to India? And they're going to do what if. They're on the fly, right? They're going to say, what if we move 15 people to India and we get a pricing benefit in Canada or opening up a call center there, and we do that, and they're going to have that stuff, then why aren't you building a model that is flexible enough to be able to handle that instead of constantly having to do one-offs? Constantly having to do, and so that's what I mean, just a lack of creativity, a lack of building in what-ifs, and giving the sort of flexibility that's required for something is going to happen over and over. And I see that a lot in finance departments until someone of some sort of, it's not even necessarily an Excel skill, it's someone who has pride in their work and tenacity to make something like that happen.
Yeah, and this whole thing, this conversations recently, and a recent blog post of mine, and Jordan wrote about this as well, about what makes a good analyst. is that kind of stuff, because that math might not be very hard, but if you start thinking in the future, even the future as in tomorrow morning, I know somebody's going to want to change something and look at things, but when you just got this stuff is all over the place, no, it's not flexible. You got one view, and any other view is going to call for massive surgery.
But I'll tell you, that ticks me off more than inheriting someone's spreadsheet that is not color coded.
Right.
No, I think that we have this notion of keep it simple, stupid, and what it's become is keep it stupid. They forgot that. They're just so obsessed with simplicity that there's something lost. So I've seen ones that have done foreign exchange. Foreign exchange spreadsheets for some reason are always the worst because there's so many assumptions you have to do with it. And then you see that that someone has, let's say they have an exchange of 1.1, that's the index, whatever. You'll see that they've put that in the formula, hard typed it, so that it couldn't be changed, so that you can't do a what if, and you're thinking, and they're like, oh, but I want to keep it simple. I don't want to make it too complicated. But you're giving it to this person, and so then you hand that, okay, so it's going to be shown to a decision maker, and then you take that spreadsheet and hand it to someone, and they're saying, well, you got a 1.1 over here, a 1.3 over here, a 1.4. If you had put it on the spreadsheet, at least I would have traced it. At least I could have had some notes, or yeah, that one. And it's very interesting what you guys are saying, because it's not really a spreadsheet skill. It's a soft skill. It's a personal skill, right?
It's organization and logic, and thinking about more than just getting the math right, but thinking about flexibility and how dynamic is this? Will you constantly be adding data to it? Will you be constantly changing the data that's in it? Or is this truly just a one-off? All of those kind of questions guide how you go further as an analyst. And one thing I'll say, because I've had a lot of great clients, and one, there was payroll being managed, and it was this vertical scrolling thing, and lots of details in it, prorating and who worked on this project, how much time, and how much does this project owe toward that person's bonus when they started in this part of the year, all kind of stuff. And they said, no, you can't change the layout. These people, they are close to retirement, and they've been looking at this thing like this for 10 years. They do not want the layout looking any different. Okay, now here's the trick is, when I say I can make it work, but this is the price, and they say okay. But when somebody says, oh, brother, that's a lot of money, then that's when we have a problem. But so with this horizontal scrolling thing, I started putting things in the tables. I made things unique. I made unique lists where other data would pull, and I made drop-down lists so that everything was tied together. And then I tightened things up, just kind of stitched it all together with some VBA to where everything would update. All right, so they were able to get the layout that they wanted, and also the data integrity was much, much tighter afterward, because I started to put things on different sheets, and they were feeding into the big scrolling monster. But I also separated things like, here's personnel, only personnel here, only hours per project go here, and just add new data to the end of the table, and here's a reset button that's going to reset the whole world. And so that's how we had that balance, and but fortunately, they could say okay when I gave them a price to make it happen.
We like it when people are happy to pay us.
Yeah, and I want to help. I want to help, and and I look at people's budget and everything, And so there's some things that just can't happen, under a certain amount when you're dealing with that kind of thing. And had they said that they had maybe half their budget, but couldn't change the layout, yeah, we would have had a problem. Because I wanted to really overhaul that whole thing and make it much, much simpler, but that wasn't an option.
Gotcha. So, great discussion. Do you have anything else there, Jordan?
You know, I would say that just one last thought, and just something to remember, because we're all, as people who may be more advanced in their careers with Excel, it's always important to be charitable. So if you inherited some work from someone else, sometimes they got to the level that was really their skill level, and it was great, and then someone said, but hey, couldn't it do this? And they said, well, yeah, I'll look that up, and they looked it up, and they took something that was great and they started shimming on all these solutions, and it grew into a monster that nobody wanted it to grow into. And you talk to them and they say, yeah, I know, it's not that great. That's why we gave it to you. So just always remember that too. But there are times to be reasonably annoyed, and there are times to also be charitable.
Yeah, and realizing too, we all started somewhere and made bad stuff and took a long time, and so just deal with it.
There are bad decisions everywhere. We can just ask Carl Pepperseed about that.